The signal coming out of Iran right now is one of rupture. Reports and videos indicate that Iranians have started attacking members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in the streets, while ceasefire negotiations collapse and push the crisis into an even more dangerous phase. This Monday, April 13th, 2026, what we see is a regime under pressure, both internally and externally, with fear growing in Tehran, in the military ranks, and also in the streets. What happened was an explosive combination of factors. On one hand, the talks between Iran and the United States in Islamabad failed after disagreements over the nuclear program, support for armed groups, and control of navigation in the region. On the other hand, the internal environment in Iran became even more tense, with reports of attacks against agents linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and signs of division within the regime's own structure. The collapse of the negotiations was not limited to diplomacy. It directly affected the streets, internal security, and the political calculations of those still trying to maintain control of the country. At the center of this shift are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iranian government, Donald Trump's team, and the regime's hardline factions. Even before any real progress in the talks, there was already strong resistance. An internal resistance against any agreement because a broad concession would be seen as surrender. That helps explain why the tension grew so much. For the regime's radicals, giving in could mean weakness. For the outraged population, keeping everything as it is means prolonging repression, fear, and misery. The clash between these two pressures creates room for a more aggressive reaction in the streets. Where is this concentrated? In Tehran, in strategic cities in the interior and along the axis that links the political crisis to the military crisis. Many reports mention attacks on checkpoints and actions against members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in urban areas, showing that the tension is no longer just in the offices or military bases. At the same time, on the regional level, the failure of the talks pushed the dispute out to sea. After the collapse of the negotiations, the United States announced a maritime blockade against Iranian ports. And the Revolutionary Guard responded by saying that the approach of military ships will be treated as a violation of the ceasefire. The streets are boiling and so is the sea. How did this crisis reach this point? Through a combination of war, economic exhaustion, ideological hardening, and diplomatic failure. Reuters showed that the Iranian economy came out of the war in serious condition, with destroyed infrastructure, inflation, unemployment, and renewed fear of production. When a regime enters negotiations weakened, pressured, and divided, every step becomes a risk. If it backs down, it's seen as capitulating. If it hardens its stance, the strain grows. And when the fallout reaches the streets, political violence stops being a hypothesis and becomes a symptom of collapse. Why do reports of attacks against members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard carry so much weight at this moment? Because they appear at the exact moment when the regime seems most exposed. Even though this kind of report requires caution, and not everything has the same level of broad independent confirmation, the political direction of the situation is clear. The authority of the Guard no longer seems untouchable. When signs of a hunt for regime agents appear in the streets, what's at stake is not just security, it's the image of power. The immediate consequence of this is devastating. The ceasefire, which was already fragile, loses strength precisely because the regime's base fears any concession and popular pressure no longer accepts paying the price for the system's survival. Reuters reported that the talks were the most important between Iran and the United States since 1979. And even so, they ended without an agreement. This shows how deep the deadlock is. It's not just a technical detail. It's a dispute over who will give in first, in a scenario where giving in could mean losing power, losing control, or even losing the very ability to command. The market already sees how serious this is. Oil prices have gone up again, the blockade is worrying several nations, and the Strait of Hormuz is once again at the center of the global crisis. Reuters highlighted that the shock of the failed talks pushed prices up and reignited fears of a new energy disruption. This matters because it shows that the collapse of the negotiations doesn't affect only Iran and the United States. It impacts fuel, transportation, inflation, and the cost of living in various parts of the world. When talks break down in Islamabad, the consequences show up far from there. In the end, Iran enters a zone where popular unrest, the rigidity of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and the failure of negotiations start to go hand in hand. What happened was the collapse of an attempt at a pause. Who pushed it to this point? It was leaders unable to reach an agreement and a regime unable to hide its own decline. How? With internal division, military threat, economic crisis, and broken diplomacy. And why? Because the regime has reached a point where negotiating weakens it, and not negotiating also exacts a brutal price.